Hello, my name is Paul Stevens, and thank you for watching my presentation on Georgia's SB 10 law and the newly enacted SB 47 law. In this course, we've had much discussion about the benefits of inclusive education for students with disabilities. When done properly, there is little doubt that inclusive education can be the optimal environment for everyone, the teachers, the students with disabilities, and their peers without disabilities. But what if it's not done properly? Many schools and districts operate with a compliance-driven mentality. In other words, they're more interested in checking off the compliance boxes than in enacting a program that would actually help their students with disabilities. Let me share my own experience. My now college-aged daughter was diagnosed with autism in the first grade. While her elementary school did an excellent job throughout the IEP process, her middle and high school suffered from constantly changing personnel and what was clearly a motivation to stay compliant. During this time, our daughter stagnated. Her IEP goals seldom, if ever, changed because she was making little to no progress. But the right boxes on her IEP were always checked. It became clear to us that her high school was simply trying to get her through, or basically pass her along until she was no longer their problem. So what do parents do when they disagree with their child's school about an IEP? Well, they can raise their concerns in the IEP meeting, this same meeting where they're typically outnumbered 5-1 or worse. And if the school disagrees, well, there's due process, which can take weeks or months. And if there's still disagreement, well, they can sue. Now, how practical is that for most families? An acrimonious relationship with your child's school, exorbitant legal fees that most cannot afford, and a legal process that could take years for a resolution. Recall the case of Sacramento Unified School District versus Rachel H. It took almost 4 years for a resolution. Many parents don't have the luxury of that kind of time. In our daughter's case, she would have already finished school by that time. So what other options do parents have? Well, there's private school if they can afford it. There's homeschooling if they can lose the income that a formerly working parent used to earn so that he or she can homeschool their child full time. What if there was another choice? In 2007, Georgia passed Senate Bill 10, which created the Georgia Special Needs Scholarship Program, or GSNS. At its core, the law allows parents of students with disabilities to move their child to a different public school in the same district, a different public school in another district, a state school for those with visual or auditory impairments, or a private school. To be eligible, the parent must have lived in Georgia for at least 1 year. The student must have attended a Georgia public school in the prior year, and the student must have received special education services through an IEP. And then, well, what about the money? Well, the FTE money that would have been allocated to the student's zoned public school, as well as any additional funds the school would have received based on the student's particular disability or disabilities, goes to the school that the student attends, whether that's another public school, a state school, or a private school. If the money went to a private school, then there are strict guidelines that state that the money must be used to offset the child's tuition and used for costs directly associated with the education and special services of that child, such as teacher salaries or medical services provided to the child. The money cannot be used, for example, for meals, extracurricular activities, marketing, or transportation. How prevalent is SB 10? Well, before SB 10 was implemented, one of the concerns was that public schools would see a dramatic loss in funding. However, that has not been the case. In 2016, the most recent year for which data is available, there were approximately 160,000 students in Georgia who received special education services through an IEP. In that year, 4,553 of those students used the GSNS to attend a private school, which is less than 3% of those eligible. For students that went to a different public school or state school, the funds simply went to that public or state school. So here are the positives to SB 10. First, parents and students have another option. If a student's not receiving the services to which the parent feels the student is entitled, then parents can avoid the lengthy due process issues, the difficult or combative relationship with their child's school, and the costly and time-consuming legal battles. In the process, they can have their student in a school that they feel is a better fit for their child. Additionally, there's far less bureaucracy at many smaller private schools. Let me give you an example. Sandy Keith, who I interviewed for this project, worked as an instructional support teacher and special education director in the Fulton County school system in Georgia for over 30 years before moving to a small private school. She describes the difference this way. Instead of spending more than half your day in IEP meetings, writing IEPs, and making sure all the boxes are checked, you get to spend your time working with the children who need you. And we have more time to meet with and talk with parents to make their child's education a true partnership. So what are the downsides to SB 10? Well, transportation. Regardless of whether a parent chooses to send their child to another public school, a state school, or a private school, the parent is responsible for providing the transportation for their student to attend that school. And that can be an issue depending on where a parent lives, urban versus suburban versus rural, availability of public transportation, and a family's financial situation. Also, it's important to know that if a parent chooses a private school, then they are waiving the legal protections that come from IDEA, including due process, procedural safeguards, and an individual right to services, and more. Now, by an individual right to services, that means that there's no individual entitlement to any service at all, such as speech or occupational therapy. That does not mean that the school will not provide those services, but they may or may not be included in tuition. The Georgia Senate Bill 47 was passed earlier this year, and it goes into effect on July 1st. This law expands the Georgia Special Needs Scholarship Program to all students who have a 504 plan. Recall that SB 10 only applied to students receiving special education services as part of an IEP, regardless of whether they had a 504 plan. Now, SB 47 says that students with a 504 plan who do not have an IEP are eligible for GSNS. Examples of students who might have a 504 plan but not an IEP might include a student with autism who needs extra time on assessments, or a student with cancer who requires hybrid in-person and remote instruction. So the question then is, will SB 47 work? The short answer, I believe, is that if the program continues to operate as it did under SB 10, then most likely yes. In 2016, there were 28,640 students with a 504 plan but no IEP in the state of Georgia. If a similar percentage of SB 47 eligible students take part in the program, as did SB 10 eligible students, then we would anticipate 859 students to utilize SB 47. That number represents less than 0.1% of the total number of students in Georgia. Now, if it turns out that the program is growing to be much larger than anticipated, then a further analysis of the costs and benefits would be necessary. The larger question then is, should parents use SB 10 and SB 47 for their children? Bottom line on top, it depends. If parents are satisfied with the services their child is receiving at their public school, then there's no need to use SB 10 or SB 47. But even if they aren't, they need to consider many factors. First, could they get their child the services they want through due process? If not, do they have the time and financial resources for a court battle? If they choose to utilize SB 10 or SB 47, are they able to provide or arrange transportation to the school? If the parents choose a private school, are they able to afford the school? SB 10 simply redirects the money that would have gone to the student's public school on behalf of that student. It's possible that there's still a gap between that amount and the cost of tuition. Depending on the school, there may be additional charges for some services, or those services might not be included. Are the parents aware of the legal protections that they're forfeiting? And at the end of the day, it's possible that the parents might be no happier with the services provided by the private school than they are with those provided by the public school. Though if that is the case, the parents can opt to try a different public school, a different private school, or go back to their original zoned public school. Suffice to say, using SB 10 and SB 47 should not be decisions made lightly. Parents need to do much research to decide if the programs are really in their child's best interest. And that said, although the program may not be what's best for every child, There are countless stories from the parents whose children have benefited from SB 10, and I imagine there will be for SB 47 as well. And that was one of the goals of IDEA, to create an individualized plan for each child, which can only happen when we treat each student as an individual. Bottom line is that SB 10 and SB 47 give these individuals another choice. Here are the authors and articles that I used during my research. Thank you for watching.